War. War never changes. From the day man learned to create weapons, he has been fighting, whether for land, resources, or just about anything else. Sadly, this desire to fight has only gotten stronger and stronger, meaning that man will most likely be fighting until the bitter end of its existence. Some such wars not only involve two opposing sides, but nearly the whole planet, fighting for power against anyone that opposed them. These wars were known as the Great Wars, and although there have only been two so far, they have ruined both lives and nations. During the Second World War, one of the most significant battles was between Japan, the quickest advancing society at the time, and the United States, the strongest world power. Their rivalry started due to Japan launching an air attack on a port in Hawaii, U.S., known as Pearl Harbor, which carried the majority of the U.S.'s Pacific Defensive Fleet. This attack, although unexpected by the U.S., was no surprise. Long before that fateful day, there was a deep-rooted racism in both nations against the other. Because Japan was so opposite in traditions to the U.S., Americans considered the Japanese to be inferior. Ironically, Japan instead viewed Americans as the lowest of the low, based on their media. They were thought to all be gangsters or prostitutes, making Japan believe that the U.S. was actually the inferior one. This, coupled with Japan's decision to expand into China, which the U.S. was opposed to, was a recipe for disaster. In fact, when Japan continued to take over territory in China, the U.S. decided to enact economic sanctions and trade embargoes on their exchanges of oil and scrap metal with Japan in an attempt to slow them down. However, this only strengthened their resolve. They continued forward, taking over most of the Pacific Islands. The only two which they had no control over were the Philippine and Hawaiian Islands, which were controlled by the U.S. Japan's desire to take over the entire Pacific and its hatred of the U.S. were the two key reasons for Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. In order to put this plan into place, Hideki Tojo, the Prime Minister of Japan, made an agreement with the U.S. to reinstate the previous trading agreement as long as Japan didn't advance past Indochina, allowing him to command Isoroku Yamamoto, the Commander-in-Chief of Japan, to start preparations for the attack on Pearl Harbor without being deprived of resources. Their goal with this attack was not only to take over the entirety of the Pacific Islands, but also to take control of the U.S.'s multiple aircraft carriers, which were thought to be at Pearl Harbor, and to completely neutralize the U.S. so that Japan would be able to advance further into China without trouble from them. So, on the early morn of December 7, 1941, after releasing an attack warning to the U.S. 30 minutes ahead of time, Japan sent out their planes. Unfortunately, the two opportunities that the U.S. had to be ready for Japan were nullified. Firstly, the attack warning was received by the president too late for him to alert Pearl Harbor, so the warning was to no avail. Secondly, when the radars were used in Pearl Harbor, there were so many blips from the Japanese planes that they were thought to either be allies or malfunction in the system. These were the two main reasons that Pearl Harbor was unprepared. As a result of the attack, 2,000 American citizens tragically died, and much of the ships and planes stationed in Hawaii were destroyed. At the other end of the spectrum, 29 Japanese planes were shot down in response. The very next day, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued a statement to Congress asking for and succeeding in receiving a declaration of war on Japan. Luckily, the planes that had attacked Pearl Harbor had not destroyed the shipyards and oil refineries and had not captured any aircraft carriers, since there were none there. These situations allowed the U.S. to quickly get back on its feet and respond, taking care to finish off enemies in Europe before later defeating the Japanese and subsequently ending World War II. That is how one of the most significant battles of one of the most significant wars was started.